The morning his email hit telling me not to come to his wedding, I was sipping lukewarm coffee. Under the harsh kitchen light, the garden bench, my late wife loved still solid behind me. I'm Grant Halverson, 58, a retired auditor. Ever had a gift turn into a bruise you couldn't ignore? I woke before the sun crested over the gray sky, the kind of Portland morning where the light feels muted, as if the world hasn't quite decided to wake up yet. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. No ring, just a dull vibration that I almost ignored. Almost. The subject line was short about the wedding, Corbin's name at the top. I opened it, still rubbing sleep from my eyes, and there it was in stark black text. Dad, we've been rethinking the guest list. With the space and logistics, it's best if you don't come to the wedding. I appreciate the help with the expenses. It's better this way. The coffee I'd brewed the night before for my morning ritual went untouched. I slipped into my jacket and stepped outside, the chill hitting me harder than usual. The garden was just waking. 2 cherry blossoms clung to the damp air like reluctant confetti. I sat on the old wooden bench beneath the azalea bushes, the one my late wife Sable used to favor when she'd read her gardening magazines. It creaked under my weight, solid and warm, despite the way my chest felt like someone had pried it open and left a crack inside. My phone screen stayed lit in my hand, the email glaring up at me. $12,500 wired last month, temporary help, Corbin had said. I remember the hopeful tone in his voice and how I'd told him to take his time paying me back. Now apparently I wasn't even worth a seat at the wedding buffet. The neighborhood around me buzzed faintly. Across the street, Mrs. Adler shuffled out in her slippers, balancing a mason jar of her homemade kombucha, like it was a newborn. Morning, Grant, she called, not waiting for a reply. Her friendliness used to feel like comfort. Now it only made me aware of how detached I felt. Somewhere down the block, a wind chime clattered like loose change. I closed my eyes and heard Sable's laugh in the breeze. She would have said, "You're taking this too quietly, Grant. Speak up for yourself." I had learned to live with quiet since she passed, letting my days fall into neat rows like numbers on a spreadsheet. But Corbin's words burned through that calm, leaving a hollow ache. At some point, I opened my laptop inside. The $12,500 wire transfer confirmation glowed on the screen, the green process checkmark mocking me. It looked like a bruise spreading across the page. Proof of a promise that had turned sour overnight. I poured myself a cup of coffee I couldn't taste and sat back outside, letting the steam rise into the damp air. A neighbor passing by mentioned almost offhand seeing Corbin's fiancée in a boutique downtown, arms full of glossy shopping bags. He didn't mean anything by it, just neighborhood chatter, but the image cut deeper than I expected. Fine linens and flower arrangements I'd never see. As the afternoon waned, a soft thud came from the front door. I opened it to find the monthly HOA newsletter sliding across the entryway, the same one nobody ever reads. Taped to the front, though, was a folded note in Corbin's handwriting. I didn't have to open it to know what it said. In blocky, uneven letters, the message was as clear as the email. "Please don't come. It's better this way." The bench in the yard creaked again when I sat back down, note in hand, petals drifting around my shoes. The world felt still, save for that wooden groan and the faint hum of a life I wasn't invited to witness anymore. I wasn't planning to stay long at Corbin's townhouse that Tuesday evening, just long enough to drop off the basket of rosemary and thyme I'd clipped from my garden. The scent clung to my hands as I reached his porch, the cedar siding damp from the morning drizzle. From behind the half-closed front door, laughter filtered through a high, sharp note, Tara's voice tinged with something I couldn't quite name. "Your dad's accounts will cover the difference, right?" she said, each word punctuated with a careless chuckle. "He won't notice." The doorframe might as well have been a wall of glass. Every syllable landed. I stood there, basket balanced against my hip, staring at the grain of the wood until the laughter faded into another room. No footsteps came to greet me. I left the herbs on the mat and walked back to my car, the cool evening air smelling faintly of charcoal from a neighbor's barbecue. At home, my dining table had become an island of unopened mail, HOA newsletters, and supermarket flyers. When I brushed a stack aside, a letter fluttered loose, a late notice from my credit union, bold red stamp screaming across the page. My pulse stuttered. I hadn't borrowed anything in decades. The notice claimed a payment had been missed on a line of credit I didn't remember authorizing. The faint hum of my old desktop filled the living room as I powered it up, each click of the aging machine sounding louder than it should. I dug through old folders, scrolling past years of tidy spreadsheets and scanned receipts. Buried among them, my most recent statement glowed on the monitor, a new auto draft line, Mortgage Servicing LLC, $1,400 pulling from an account I rarely touched. I pushed back from the desk, the chair wheels squealing against the hardwood, and poured myself a weak cup of coffee. The smell of stale grounds hung in the air. Across the fence, Mrs. Forney waved me over her sun hat, bobbing like a metronome as she trimmed her roses. Over tea in her kitchen, she leaned forward, voice dropping. "Did you hear Corbin's been talking about some property up in Richmond Hills? Says it's almost his already. Sounds fancy. Must be nice having a dad with a safety net, huh?" She winked, meaning it kindly, but it felt like a needle. By the time I got home, dusk had soaked the street in a dim amber glow. I logged into the joint account Corbin and I had used for years, originally set up to help him pay off student loans. My fingers hesitated over the keys. The balance blinked onto the screen, lower than I expected. Nearly $3,000 gone, not counting the $12,500 I'd willingly given. The transactions scrolled down in neat rows, each one carrying a date and an unrecognizable recipient. I clicked View All Transfers. The monitor's glow lit my face in the darkened room, and the man staring back in the reflection of the glass wasn't the meticulous auditor I used to be. His cheeks looked hollow, his eyes rimmed in red from nights of poor sleep. Each new transfer felt like another thread pulling loose from the life I thought I controlled. Then my phone buzzed, vibrating against the wooden desk. A new email. The subject line froze me, regarding your recent $770,000 loan. I hadn't taken any loan. My hand hovered over the screen, the hum of the old desktop fading beneath the sound of my own breath. The numbers on the monitor blurred for a moment, as though the world itself were slipping out of balance. The coffee on the desk had gone cold, a thin film gathering on top, but I didn't notice. My thumb hovered above the email icon, knowing that whatever I opened next would change more than just my evening. Rain traced lazy rivers down the diner windows, each droplet catching the weak glow of the flickering neon sign outside. The air smelled of frying bacon and burnt coffee, a comforting sort of grime that made the place feel lived in. Pastor Lennox nudged a chipped mug of black coffee toward me, the steam rising like a fragile signal in the cool room. "You can't fight shadows without a lantern." He said, his voice low, like he didn't want to disturb the two men silently working crosswords at the counter. I wrapped my fingers around the mug. The heat steadied me, but only just. On the table, my notebook lay open, a page filled with half-written figures and arrows connecting dates and transactions I barely recognized. "I don't even know where to start, Lennox," I murmured. My own voice sounded like it belonged to someone else, hoarse, thinner than I remembered. "He's my son. Confronting him feels wrong. But that email about a loan I never took, $770,000, if I don't act, I could lose everything." Lennox leaned back, the neon light painting his white hair faintly pink. "Then don't act out of anger. Act out of knowledge. Collect everything before you move. Emails, contracts, even whispers. People like Corbin's fiancé." His brow lifted. "They live in whispers." The waitress shuffled over with a pot of fresh coffee. Her apron was frayed at the hem, her smile tired but genuine. For a moment she reminded me of my daughter when she used to visit during college breaks, always juggling too much but finding a way to make people feel seen. I ordered nothing more than a refill. Lennox gave her a polite nod. When she left, I fished for my wallet and felt the crumpled sticky note in my pocket. I pulled it free. The paper was yellowed, the ink faded but still legible. "Stand up when no one else will." Sable's handwriting. My late wife's voice felt alive again in those loops and curves, as if she tucked it there this morning instead of years ago. Lennox took it gently from my hand, reading the words under his breath before setting it back beside my notebook. "Maybe she's still guiding you, Grant. Maybe this is her way of saying you can't just sit in the garden and let the weeds take over." I stared at my own careful pen strokes on the notebook page. Screenshot every transfer. Call Merchant Trust. photograph late notices, review joint account logs, speak with Mrs. Forney again. The checklist looked clinical detached, like something I'd prepare for a client back when I worked as an internal auditor. Only now the audit was my own life. The diner's neon light flickered again, casting the booth in momentary shadow. I thumbed through my phone, finding the number for Merchant Trust's fraud department. My hands shook as I dialed, knuckles whitening as I held the phone to my ear. Merchant Trust, this is Alyssa Fraud and Dispute Resolution. How can I help you tonight? My name is Grant Halverson, I said, forcing my voice to stay even. I just received an email about a loan, $770,000. I didn't apply for anything like that. I think my identity's been stolen. The line crackled, the hum of the diner's fluorescent light mixing with Alyssa's measured typing. Sir, she said after a beat, this loan is in your name, signed in person. We even have your signature on file. For a moment, all I heard was the steady patter of rain on the diner roof, drowning out the hiss of the friars and the low murmur of the regulars. I pressed my free hand against the cool Formica tabletop, as though it could anchor me while the floor shifted beneath my feet. The sticky note lay beside my notebook. Sable's faded words seeming to blur in the dim light. Stand up when no one else will. My throat tightened. I didn't yet know what standing up would look like, but I knew I couldn't stay seated in that booth forever. The bench let out a sharp pop beneath me, a sound so loud it startled a crow from the bare maple overhead. The wood gave slightly a thin splinter, jutting against my coat, and for a moment I wasn't sure if it was the bench or my chest that had cracked first. The air carried the metallic bite of cold earth frost, clinging stubbornly to the rose bushes along the fence line. Even the garden, Sable's garden, seemed to hold its breath. I rubbed my sternum with my gloved hand, the other digging into my pocket, until I felt the familiar rattle of my pill bottle. The small orange cylinder was my daily reminder that time and stress weren't things I could negotiate with anymore. The pills clicked softly as I pulled them free, twisting the cap, just enough to pop one onto my tongue. The phone buzzed in my lap, pulling me back. Grant, Dr. Reeves's voice filtered through the speaker, calm but firm. You need to listen to your body, tightness, fatigue, tremors. This is stress playing Russian roulette with your heart. Come in tomorrow morning, no excuses. I told him I would. My voice sounded steady, but my hand trembled as I tucked the phone back into my coat. The garden bench creaked again as I shifted forward, and I realized I'd been holding my breath without meaning to. The mailbox was still open from earlier. A stack of envelopes leaned against the lip, one half crushed by damp. I carried them to the bench, sorting through junk flyers, HOA newsletters, a holiday card. I'd been too late to answer, and one thick folded contractor's invoice. The envelope was addressed to me, but I hadn't hired anyone for renovations. Richmond Hills, it read at the top in bold serif font, followed by a list of figures that made my stomach knot. A total of $68,000. At the bottom, a signature in my name, except the ink had smudged into a faint gray blur. As I held it to the dim light, I caught the ghost of a C, looping beneath Corbin's distinctive slant, bleeding faintly into the smear. My thumb traced the ridge where the paper had wrinkled. Every detail screamed forgery, from the pressure marks on the G to the faint fingerprint-like smudge in the margin. But what struck me harder than the fraud was the clarity of it. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was proof. A text pinged on my phone, pulling me from the invoice. Busy, stop worrying. Corbin. No punctuation beyond that. I stared at it for a long moment, the letters blurring as my pulse climbed. The bench groaned again when I leaned back. This time I heard more than just the creak. There was a new sound, a tearing, splintering noise. I shifted my weight and looked down. A crack snaked along the seat slat, narrow but deep, running almost the full length beneath me. The bench had held through years of rain, through Sable's weight, and mine combined when we'd sit here with evening tea. Now, under nothing more than me alone, it was giving way. The frost bit through my coat as I stood, in voice still clutched in my shaking hand. I turned back toward the bench. It looked small now, fragile, its split edge catching the pale winter light like a scar. My chest felt tight again, not sharp, but heavy, like every unasked question, and every unpaid dollar Corbin had buried in my name was pressing inward. I slid the invoice into my coat pocket and glanced at the garden one last time, the roses blackened by frost, the bench visibly broken. My breath came out in a cloud, hanging briefly before it vanished. "It's time to stop waiting," I whispered, my voice barely carrying beyond the empty yard. The bench creaked once more as the wind nudged it, its broken slat tapping softly against the frame. A hollow sound like a warning. I stood on Maple Street, hands jammed deep into my coat pockets, staring at the house I never bought but apparently owned. 2 stone pillars flanked a glass facade that reflected the pale spring sky, like a mirror giving back nothing but my hunched silhouette. A rectangle of earth in the front yard had been hollowed into a muddy pit, workers in neon vests shouting over the whine of drills as they carved out space for a pool. My name, my actual name, was buried in every nail, every shovel of dirt, and I felt the weight of it pressing behind my ribs. In my pocket, a folded HOA bill rasped as I shifted my stance. The paper was yellowed, crease-stamped, past due in thick crimson ink. 3 months unpaid. The irony wasn't lost on me, a man who spent 30 years auditing companies for misplaced cents, now the unwilling owner of a half-built monument to debt. The Richmond Hills enclave felt like another planet compared to my quiet Portland block. Every lawn looked combed with a ruler. Sleek electric sedans whispered down the street, their owners lifting 2 fingers in perfunctory waves to the HOA reps strolling by in navy blazers. I'd been invisible most of my life by choice, but standing there, I felt like a trespasser on my own ruin. Harry Donovan, the contractor I'd spoken to briefly over the phone, lumbered toward me with a clipboard. Mr. Halverson. His hard hat sat crooked and his beard was dusted with drywall powder. "Wasn't expecting you till Monday." "I wasn't expecting to be here at all," I said. My voice came out calmer than I felt. "This property, when exactly did my son start this project?" Donovan flipped through his papers, oblivious to the churn in my chest. "Let's see. Permits filed last October, foundation late December. Been full steam since January. He's a busy guy, your boy. We never see him. Always texting instructions says you're the one covering the paperwork, so..." His eyes flicked up briefly, gauging my reaction. Didn't realize there was a problem. A rivulet of cold sweat slipped beneath my collar. I followed him around the side of the house, where workers hammered siding into place, each strike reverberating like a gavel. Near the garage, a stack of invoices flapped in the breeze, weighted by a can of paint thinner. I knelt and started snapping photos with my phone dates and amounts, all tied to my accounts. A property posting tacked to a temporary fence confirmed it plainly: Grant Halverson, loan obligor, not Corbin. Not anyone else, just me. From the pit, 2 workers laughed between shovelfuls of clay. "Mrs. Halverson's really pushing this," one said. "Wants it done before the big event. Can't imagine throwing a party with a half-dug pool." The title hit my ears like grit. Mrs. Halverson. Tara wasn't even married to my son yet, but she already had this neighborhood calling her by my last name. I thought of Sable, of her gentle way of never letting anyone claim more than they earned, and my jaw tightened until I felt a pulse throb along my temple. I thumbed a message into my phone, each keystroke deliberate. "We need to talk. Now." The screen stayed stubbornly blank after I hit send. No dots, no reply, just my own reflection staring back at me. A gust of wind swept through, snapping the edges of a rolled blueprint off Donovan's truck bed. The tube spun across the driveway, uncoiling as it went. I caught it before it hit the mud, the paper cold and stiff in my hands. My eyes fell immediately to the bottom right corner, where signatures repeated like a mantra: Grant Halverson printed, sign stamped page after page. Every foundation line, every inspection order bearing a name I hadn't written but would be bound to. I rolled the blueprint tight, tucking it beneath my arm like evidence. The drills cut off suddenly as a foreman barked new orders, leaving only the hum of a distant leaf blower and my own pulse in my ears. My phone buzzed. A voicemail notification slid across the screen. Pastor Lennox's name glowing softly. I pressed it to my ear. His steady voice breaking through the static of the construction noise. "Grant, I've heard whispers Corbin's throwing a gala at that property. Saturday night, Big crowd, lots of eyes. Be ready, the line went dead, leaving only the wind and the faint tap of blueprint paper against my coat. I stood there on the manicured curb, staring at the glass facade that seemed to watch me back, and realized I wasn't here just to collect evidence anymore. The house, the debt, the signatures, they weren't shadows anymore. They were walls closing in, and Saturday would be the first time I pushed back. I sat in the passenger seat of Pastor Lennox's aging sedan, its engine humming like a nervous breath as the mansion's driveway glowed ahead. Strings of white bulbs traced the roofline, and a line of tuxedoed guests shuffled past the valet laughter, mingling with the thump of bass leaking from inside. Through the tinted window, I could see the reflection of myself, jaw-tight, shoulders drawn in just beneath the neon letters of the catering van that read Exquisite Evenings. Somewhere in that glass and stone house, the deed still bound me like a chain, my name etched across every unpaid mortgage page. Lennox tapped the steering wheel softly, eyes forward. Breathe, Grant. In through your nose, out slow. You're here to stand, not to spar. His calm voice was a rope I could hold on to. I nodded, sliding a hand into my coat pocket to feel the rough edge of the bench fragment wrapped in yellowing electrical tape, a piece of the thing that had split beneath me weeks ago. It was absurd maybe to carry broken wood into a room full of crystal and silk, but it reminded me what this all truly cost a life, cracking beneath betrayal. In the glove box, a copy of the court order sat in a neat manila folder. James Baxter, the bailiff, had checked it twice before meeting us at the curb, his expression carved from granite. He didn't waste words, he simply adjusted his badge on his belt and said, "We move when you're ready." Inside, the air was a mixture of things that didn't belong together. Sharp perfume, the faint chemical tang of fresh paint, the sweet fizz of champagne spilling from overfilled flutes. The marble foyer echoed each step we took, the chatter dimming as people noticed the trio that didn't fit the mood. Corbin spotted us first near the staircase, his face blanching beneath a practiced smile. Tara's sequined gown caught the chandelier light flashing like a warning signal as she clutched his arm. "Dad, what are you doing here?" Corbin's voice had a performative cheer, just loud enough for the nearby crowd. "This isn't the time." Baxter stepped forward before I could speak, his badge glinting under the recessed lights. "Corbin Halverson." His voice was flat official, cutting clean through the murmurs. "By order of Multnomah County, this property purchased under fraudulent signatures and unpaid liens is hereby subject to immediate injunction and eviction proceedings." He handed the envelope directly into Corbin's stiff fingers. "You've been served." The room went silent except for the low hum of the string quartet in the corner, oblivious to the freeze around them. A woman near the bar gasped. Someone's phone camera clicked faintly. Tara's nails dug crescents into Corbin's sleeve as she hissed, "Do something. Smile. Fix it." Corbin's mask cracked as he turned toward me, pulling me aside with a grip that trembled despite his effort to look composed. His voice dropped to a near whisper. "Dad, listen, it's just temporary. The market dipped, lenders panicked. I had no choice. You're being stubborn. If you just—" I thought of Sable's looping handwriting on that faded sticky note, the one Lennox had read aloud in the diner, months ago. "Stand up when no one else will." My hand tightened on the bench fragment in my pocket, its splintered edge biting my palm. "No, Corbin," I said quietly, steady as I could manage. "This isn't a dip or a panic. This is you signing my name and calling it necessity. It ends tonight." His mouth open-closed, searching for a thread of persuasion. Then somewhere behind him, a glass shattered. He dropped his champagne flute without realizing the crystal exploding across the polished floor in a scatter of sharp echoes. The sound froze the room, further a haunting rhyme to the sharp pop of the bench back in February. Tara winced and stooped to grab his arm, hissing at him to keep his composure. Lennox placed a steadying hand on my shoulder. "We're done here, Grant," he said softly, his voice both anchor and release. "Let the papers do the talking now." As we turned for the door, the murmurs swelled like a tide at our backs. Tara's voice sliced through them, sharp and theatrical, pitched just enough to carry. "You've destroyed your own family, old man. They'll all remember you as the villain." I paused just long enough to breathe in the mingled scents of champagne and latex paint, the sterile falseness of it all. Then I stepped out into the night air, cooler and cleaner, the sound of the party shrinking behind us. The bench fragment pressed against my ribs as we walked to the car, a reminder that I hadn't broken. I'd just bent far enough to know where I needed to stand. The phone vibrated against the wood of my desk, its low hum rattling the edge of an unopened 401k statement. I didn't need to read it to know what it would tell me: months of losses, months of fear I hadn't admitted aloud. On the screen, Della's name glowed. I hesitated, thumb hovering before answering. Her voice came sharp and measured the kind of cold that pretends to be polite. "The kids want to talk to you," she said flatly. "Not to forgive you, just to say what they need to say." Ellie's voice erupted, first raw and cracking. "You ruined everything. You embarrassed Dad. You humiliated Tara in front of everyone. Do you even care about us?" Her anger hissed through the speaker, each word a jagged edge. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear, staring at the faint scratch on my desk where Sable once kept her teacup. Noah's voice followed, softer but no gentler. "We had to switch schools, Grandpa. Dad says it's your fault we lost the house. You didn't have to make it public." There was a catch in his breath, a brief hesitation that told me he didn't fully believe what he was saying. Then the line clicked dead. For a while I sat in the dim light of the study, listening to the cicadas outside. The 401k envelope slid to the floor as I exhaled heavy, letting the room go still. My fingers found the bench piece on the desk, taped and splintered its edges, worn smooth from weeks of turning it over in my hands. The thing felt more alive than I did. A gentle knock broke the silence. Mrs. Bennet stood on the porch with a tin of cookies and her usual cardigan draped over her shoulders. She didn't look at me with pity, just quiet understanding. Sometimes she said softly, placing the tin on my counter, "Love isn't about saying yes. It's about standing where it hurts." She didn't stay long, only patted my arm before shuffling back down the walkway, her slippers brushing against the warm concrete. Night crept in with a sticky stillness. I wandered into the garden, the overgrown roses whispering against my jeans as I passed. The stars blinked faintly through a patch of clearing clouds, each one a pinhole of light in the dark fabric above. I gripped the bench piece like a cane, tracing the rough tape with my thumb, as though the texture could steady my pulse. Then, like a tide rushing in the dizziness, came my knees buckled and I dropped among the roses, palms pressed into the cool soil. The metallic taste of fear rose in my mouth as I gasped, counting each breath like it might be my last. The taped wood pressed into my side, where I clutched it, grounding me against the spinning world. The phone rang again, this time, a different name glowing on the screen. Pastor Lennox. I answered with shaking fingers, my voice barely a whisper. "Grant," he said, calm and steady, as if he'd been waiting for me to fall. "Meet me tomorrow. There's a way to turn this into something bigger than revenge." His words floated in the night air, a lifeline I wasn't sure I could grab yet, but one I couldn't ignore. The call ended. I stayed there in the dirt for a while, the smell of earth in my lungs, the bench fragment warm against my palm. And for the first time in weeks, the garden didn't feel like a place I'd lost. It felt like one I could still grow back into. Under the apple tree Sable planted a decade ago, I placed the bench, now smooth, its cracks filled with shimmering seams of gold epoxy, beside a bed of blooming tulips. The morning light slid through the branches, glinting off the repaired wood, and for the first time in months, I felt like something in my life had been mended rather than lost. Pastor Lennox stood a few feet away, his weathered hands resting on a folder of paperwork, nodding in approval. Sparrows swooped in, as if on cue, landing softly along the bench's backrest, chirping into the cool air. The sound, bright and almost ceremonial, pulled a faint smile from my lips. Neighbors milled about the yard, their chatter gentle. Mrs. Bennet, wrapped in her usual cardigan, handed out small cups of lemonade to a group of retirees. A few church members were arranging seed packets and gardening tools on a folding table, ready for the workshop we had planned. It had been just over a year since that night at Richmond Hills, when my name was shouted over champagne and broken glass. The settlement had closed quietly, sparing what was left of my savings. A portion of it now funded this project, the Sable Halverson Garden Fund, a program for widows and retirees to learn how to coax life from soil, to share afternoons in the sun, to feel rooted again. I thought the name might hurt to see printed on banners and flyers. Instead, it felt steady. As people gathered closer to the apple tree, I cleared my throat. My voice didn't carry much these days, but it didn't need to. This space, I began slowly, isn't about loss. It's about what grows after. A light breeze moved through the branches, scattering pale petals into the air like soft snow. Pastor Lennox took over, thanking volunteers and explaining how the fund would provide small grants to seniors who wanted to start their own backyard gardens. I stood beside him, not as a speaker, but as a witness. When the last of the visitors wandered toward their cars, I noticed Noah lingering near the gate, his hands buried deep in the pockets of a hoodie. He looked older than I remembered, shadows under his eyes, but not angry, not anymore. He didn't come closer, not at first. Just stood there glancing at the bench, then back at me. "Can I?" His voice was unsure, quiet. "Can I visit again sometime?" I nodded, my throat tightening, but no words came. None were needed. He gave a small nod back, then slipped away down the path, his sneakers scuffing softly against the gravel. The yard grew still again, save for the sparrows and the creak of the apple tree in the breeze. I lowered myself onto the bench, the gold seams warm beneath my palms, catching the late morning sun. For a moment I closed my eyes and let the quiet settle. The wind shifted, carrying the faintest echo of Sable's laughter, light fleeting, more feeling than sound. It threaded through the rustle of leaves tangled with bird song and settled somewhere deep in my chest. Peace, I realized, didn't erase the ache. It simply made space for it to sit beside something new. I stayed there under the apple tree, eyes closed, breathing in the mingled scents of tulips and fresh soil, letting the warmth of the bench and the softness of the day remind me that even broken things, if pieced together carefully, could hold weight again. The late sun painted long stripes of gold across the repaired bench, its seams gleaming softly, while the scent of tilled soil lingered in the breeze. Sitting there, I realized justice hadn't come as revenge, but as a chance to grow something lasting. Sometimes bridges collapse so we can learn which ones are worth rebuilding. Even after loss and betrayal, life can sprout new roots if we let it breathe. For anyone facing a fracture, be it family work or health, there's still a way forward. Has life ever handed you a second chance in disguise? Share your story in the comments or join me here for more moments like this.